जनाब अजय साहनी साहब से तशरीफ लाएं। चाहे अंग्रेजी में बोलें चाहे हिंदी में बोलें।
मजबूरी है, अंग्रेजी में बोलूँगा। I regret that I must begin by agreeing with Arif Sahab that for different reasons that I do not believe that this will be a very impactful book. But it is a very important book. It's important because it displays an enormous courage to speak, and I know that this is not the first time you have spoken, but that you have been speaking on a subject on which a tremendous silence has been imposed across the world, not only by the threat of violence, but by an enormous and enveloping stream of intimidation in the name of political correctness, where you have not been able, not just you, but no voices have been permitted to be raised. For decades, every atrocity committed by various extremist groupings, and this does not apply to Islam alone or Islamist groupings alone, have been justified in terms of a wide range of what is called root causes. I have never seen a consistent descriptive of what these root causes are. Of course, every act is caused, but no stream can be identified of root causes where we can say that this is the sufficient or the necessary condition for the emergence of violence. It has been an enormously, very, very impactful experience today to hear first Naqvi Saab and then Arif Saab. Great wisdom, great learning has been reflected here. And I am essentially a compiler of data on terrorism, so my perspectives will tend to be somewhat limited. But I have two problems with the way Islamism is being approached. One of them is implicit in your book, where you feel that an alternative vision of Islam can confront this violent vision of Islam. Arif Saab has essentially given the argument of how Islam should rightly be interpreted. Neither your book nor what is written in the Quran matters. There is always sufficient ambiguity in all religious texts to allow any kind of interpretation. Muhammad bhi tera, Jibreel bhi, Quran bhi teri, magar ye harf shiri tarjuma tera hai ya mera. And this is something, I'm always like to go back to one example. The Bhagavad Gita, to my mind, is one of the most unadulterated calls to war, to violence. Here is a prince who is saying, I cannot fight my own brothers, my uncles, my teachers. And the incarnation of God tells him, for all these various reasons, it is your duty to fight. And this is the book that Mahatma Gandhi says inspired me. So I don't think this intellectual debate really has a future, precisely for the reason that a very large segment of the population has been taught, as Arif Saab said, not to think, not to question. But there are transformations happening which make books like this important. Again, there was this idea कि मजबूरी होगी तो सोचेंगे, और वो मजबूरियां बनती चली जा रही हैं. I think Islam is today being forced into a dark age by these extremist forces. And today it is the Muslim who suffers most from Muslim extremism. Yes, in the West there is this great and constant drama over 3 killed here or 5 killed there. But for every 3 and 5 killed here, 3,000 and 5,000 or perhaps many more, are being killed in the Muslim world itself. And I think the Islamic State, the ISIS in particular, the Islamic State, which started off as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, has been a tremendously important development over here. It is a tremendously destabilizing development. Unfortunately, this is not going to be a history of quick lessons learned. Unfortunately, the evil that is spreading over West Asia is not going to be constrained within its current bounds. I suspect it will go much further. I suspect the destabilization will envelop Saudi Arabia and what appear to be the very strong and stable states of this region. There will be tremendous bloodshed. But this initial bloodshed that we already see, after decades of continuous Islamist extremism in many other theaters, including South Asia, is beginning to force more and more people from within the community, Orthodox Muslims, believers, and I think that is the category that matters. Not people like us, not outsiders, not non-Muslims, not even liberal democratic Muslims, but believers, to question the doctrines that have been implicitly, if not accepted, but tolerated by all Muslims or by majorities of Muslims for a long time. I think the many justifications that have been given, and this is the second thing, and you do it again and again in your book, challenging the states that have tried to construct themselves on an Islamist ideology and basis. I think these justifications need to be slowly questioned. You have, in fact, gone against one of the, I think, great dogmas that have sustained Islamist extremism in politics, and questioned the idea of how Palestine is to be approached and structured. I have some differences of opinion on that. But I think it's important to look at Palestine. Naqvi Saab always has a profound understanding of history. And he spoke of what harm colonialism has done to the world. And we are all aware of this. And every time we look at the chaos in West Asia, we look at the issue of Palestine, we say, look at the causes, look at what they have suffered as under colonialism. Look at the arbitrariness of the maps that have been drawn in these regions. And we discover that this is applied essentially to a particular segment or population or community consistently. We have reduced Muslims in the global discourse to a category of children who are not accountable for the violence or for their actions or the violence they engage in. I have never heard anyone articulate the argument that please look at the root causes of the violence of the Zionist. Has he not suffered in history? Has he not been despised and murdered and hated across the world for millennia? But this logic is never applied to the Zionist. The Zionist is evil. I mean, it is obvious. The same lunatic cartographer drew a line through the subcontinent and created India and Pakistan. Why is Pakistan where it is? And why we, with the same history of colonial distortion, abuse, extortion, exploitation, how is it that we have chosen a marginally better path? So I think one of the core elements over here in your book has been this demand that the Muslim take responsibility for much of what he has done and what he is doing. And I think this is a crucial message. And it is a message that the Muslim is going to be forced to understand, not by logic, not by reason, though at a certain stage logic and reason will enter into the discourse, but by the sheer enormity of the violence that he is now directing against himself. In Pakistan, Today, on the average, year after year, year on year, over the past 8 years, they've been losing an average of 7,000 plus people to terrorism. Decades ago, in the late 1960s, Ubaidullah Aleem, one of the very great poets of Pakistan, wrote 2 beautiful lines at a time when this was only beginning. There used to be ikka dukka qatl ho jata tha, koi uthagiri ho jati thi. At that time he wrote words that I think apply with such great resonance even today. And the violence today is infinitely greater than what it was then. कोई और तो नहीं बस एक खंजर आजमाई, हम ही कत्ल कर रहे हैं, हम ही कत्ल हो रहे हैं. This is the tragedy of the Muslim world today. And we may constantly say, America does this, the Zionist conspiracy, and all these conspiracies of the world that are ongoing. But why are you the constant collaborators in these conspiracies? Yes, the Americans have given you weapons for their own devious ends, but why have you chosen to use them? Not only against those you believe to be your inherent enemies, but against those who are essentially part of the family of Islam. But then, as you say, the family of Islam is not the family of Islam. Every other sect is a kafir. Every other sect is an apostate. And I believe the Al-Qaeda has now also, not now, but several years ago, also declared the entire Pakistani state and its army apostate and said that they are legitimate targets of jihad. So where does this end? I think it will only end when there is so much of churning within the community that it is forced to reinvent its orientation, return to a degree of reason, return to a realization that there is no great power being exercised when you take 200 prisoners and cut their heads off or set them alive, on fire alive, or shoot them through the head in a mass murder. The weapons you are using are not your weapons. You did not make them. You do not have the economies, you do not have the technologies, you do not have the capacity, human resources, the intellect today within the Islamic world to really sustain a single one of these wars. These wars are again wars that are being funded, created, armed by outsiders. And then you go about beating your breast and saying, we are victims, we are victims. But you are victims of choice. Father Jami used a beautiful expression to describe politics in the Arab world. He spoke of the political traditions of belligerent self-pity. Belligerent self-pity. It is this combination of constant victimhood and aggression. It is the Palestinian state, so-called, with a begging bowl and a gun. It is Pakistan with a begging bowl and a gun. I think another very, very important aspect that you do raise is the nature of Muslim society. And there are beautiful lines which I insist on reading out. It says, unless gender apartheid is stamped out, we will make no progress, even if the wealth of 100 Saudi Arabias is left at our feet. A community that treats its mothers as second-class citizens cannot expect its daughters to be treated with respect by others. You have spoken of social relations in your book within the Arab world, which are at the very core of the backwardness of this entire community. Not within the Arab world, but within large parts of the Muslim world. I think another very crucial aspect is the adoption of this extremist ideology and the propagation of this extremist ideology by states. We all speak of madrasas and mullahs and the various other provocateurs who have contributed in significant measure. But in no part of the world has this problem become truly acute unless the entire state structure is behind it. I think South Asia is a fascinating example of what is ongoing over here when we look at the ISIS. Hardly anyone today has gone from Bangladesh. In fact, there is no recorded case, this may be because the records are very poor, of course, of anyone having gone from Bangladesh to join the ISIS. Though there have been some arrests in Dhaka for people who are trying to recruit for the ISIS. A handful of people have gone from India. Hundreds have gone from Pakistan. Why is Bangladesh today stabilizing? Because the state has suddenly withdrawn, in fact suppressed all Islamist extremist groupings through various devices, many of which, and unfortunately look at this also, look at the irony of this. When one Islamic country or Muslim dominated, it is an Islamic state, it still calls itself an Islamic republic. When one such country starts acting with force and focus against extremism, all of Europe stands up and says, your laws are wrong. Your war crimes trials do not follow the processes that we follow in Europe. Yes, but where does the white guilt go when a couple of small incidents occur in Europe and you transform your entire laws? Where does white guilt go when you ban the hijab? I don't feel frightened seeing any woman in a hijab. I feel offended because a woman is being forced into this, and I am sure of that. But I am not afraid, oh my God, terrorists are coming. I actually feel frightened of all religion. I'm an agnostic. So I have a problem with all religion. But if you are permitting one, then you see the backlash of extremism in the West. That does not frighten them. Anders Breivik, what was his name? Anders Behring Breivik. That does not frighten them. But when the Muslim comes into their countries, it frightens them. And Europe is today suffering because for decades it has encouraged Islamist extremism. It has not only Islamist extremism, but extremism of every form all over the world. Mr. Gill is here and he will tell you the kind of support Khalistani extremism got from the West, the kind of denial under which Khalistani extremists were permitted to function from European countries. And everyone who went there after committing God knows how many crimes over here was given political asylum as being a victim of state oppression. Not only the Khalistanis, but Muslim extremists from all over the world were given safe haven in these countries as being politically oppressed. And now, if you go around, we have droves of Europeans coming here and saying, how is it that India has not had any people going to, or had so few people going to Iraq and Syria to fight with the ISIS? And how are so many thousands going from Europe? Tiny countries. Belgium, 300 old people. Norway, 50 to 60 people. Population of 470 odd million, 1,000 Muslims. 60 to 70 have gone to join ISIS in Iraq. And they are completely uncomprehending, not only of what they have done, but what they are currently doing. Because these streams of justification are not ending. And they are very, very strong and entrenched elements within what describes itself as the Muslim world. Especially these states which identify with the idea of Islamism or Islamic identity exploitation as I see it, who constantly reinforce these trends. I think this book, finally, I would like to say, is going to be extremely important in a future scenario when more and more people within these extremist communities and not within Muslims. You see, one of the important things, we have a tendency to just think that all the people over here have been brainwashed. Not here, of course, but all the people in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. But even today, I believe the majority, an overwhelming majority of people in Pakistan still declare themselves as Barelvi. So there is a very, very large constituency. Unfortunately, even they are not tempted to read stuff like this. But there will be eventually, and as I said, the sheer surfeit of violence is going to force a rethink. And where such a rethink begins and occurs, and I think it is already occurring. As I said, more and more voices are being raised from within Orthodox, conservative Muslim communities against this kind of violence. Condemnations are coming. And at that stage, I think a book like this will play a very important role in helping people discover what needs to be thought of again and discover the flaws within the community that have resulted in the great tragedy of the Muslim world today. Thank you very much.